Black people are the most oppressed people in the world.
Why black people in particular? Why do you say that?
Ugh.
I know, that's why I didn't want to necessarily...
The Holocaust happened, but the scale is not true.
But don't start...
It's not that happened there.
My point is, I think it's disingenuous to give anybody the ultimate label of victim.
That's fair.
And I think it's, being black, I think it's more harmful to the black community to give us this label as the most oppressed. Because I think everybody has their own respective level of oppression.
Yeah.
And I think it's just more evident or more amplified because America has a specific racial relationship between white people and black people.
So racism isn't necessarily a bad thing.
I will argue any white person, any black person, any minority, any person who's oppressed on this topic. As a mixed biracial kid, I was always too white for black people and too black for white people.
Racism, being proud of who you are and your color and your race and your ethnicity and your culture and your tradition and all these things, having that proudness, having that belief in who you are and where you come from, because that's the whole point. God created us in tribes on purpose, because...
What tribe am I part of then?
And that's where it gets interesting for you, because...
We're here at the Post-Workout Podcast. We've got Mo Sabla joining us today. Mo Sabla is a long-standing friend of mine. Man, we go way back.
Way back. way back.
Yeah. Dude, how have you been?
I've been good, man. I've been good.
Have you ever done something like this before?
Not an actual podcast, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't that like professional or nothing, but it's...
No, you're very humble. But I think you've done a really good job, especially from what I've seen.
I remember when I first got back to Kansas City and you start training with Roy, I remember thinking like, dude, finally, Mo Sabla starting to realize it takes base discipline to be able to actually achieve. I have stuff see that thing written on my board, that little like diagram, that little like curve looking thing. Do you remember, did you take stats in high school?
I did.
Do you remember the bell curve distribution?
I do. Actually,
it was like how many deviations away from the mean and stuff like that, standard deviations and all that. When you started finally working out with Roy, there was a level of me appreciating you finally tapping into the extreme outlier version of yourself. And the way I like teach my clients is I have them think about a bell curve distribution, the Gaussian distribution curve.
Yes.
And when you think of that bell curve, you have extremes on each end. You can have the extreme shitty version of yourself or the extreme positive version of yourself. And when I see anybody putting in the extracurricular work, it's like, let's go. Like Mo's finally tapping into a certain level of 1% version of himself that he's always had capable in his potential.
Absolutely. Yeah, that I feel like the whole training aspect of having a trainer makes a big difference, but also having the right trainer too makes a big difference. I think you and Roy are good examples of that. For me, I think I realized how disappointed I was in myself in my earlier years because I was playing school sports and stuff like that. So when you're in when you're in sports, when you're younger, you think there's only a certain level I can get to, and I'm kind of stuck there. There's a threshold you get to, and you're just stuck. But I started realizing that if I had just trained extra hard and I actually measured the training that I was doing, and I actually paid attention to nutrition and all the different workouts and muscle confusions that I can do to myself that can actually push me to that next level. I think I would have definitely made it further in terms of like my physical ability.
Did you want to be like a high level athlete?
No, I knew I could never be. Not that I could never be. I knew that I've always had that competitive edge, I feel like, compared to most people. I was always, I guess, naturally kind of fast. And I was always obsessed with speed. And I actually told Roy this. I told him my goal is to eventually start timing myself in 100 meters and 200 meters again, and then start working from there.
And have you?
Not the actual timing part.
Do you still work out with Roy?
No, but I still do a lot of the workouts that we
Okay.
did together. I go for jogs like twice a week now.
When you said I run, I wanted to just make a.
I know it's terrible.
No. I was gonna make a. Well, I also ran, but you're Palestinian, but I ran, so.
Oh, yeah. For everyone watching this, that's where we go way back.
Oh, right.
With jokes like that. So
just play on words, bro.
Yeah, of course.
Nothing malicious about that one.
That's also another funny subject. Is I have the thickest skin that I know when it comes to stuff like that.
Well, it's very humble of you.
Yeah. I think what makes me obsessed with speed is the way the fast twitch muscles work and how explosive we can really be. I don't know if you know, there was a Chinese sprinter. He actually broke the record for like the first 40-meter time in a 100-meter dash. And he was in the race with Usain Bolt in the Olympics in 08, I believe. I think it was 08. And he got absolutely dusted. And typically it's like it's a well-known fact when it comes to sprinters. You have to have a certain type of body, where that's why usually the longer legs you have, like Usain Bolt, and then the shorter torso makes you a better sprinter.
Okay.
But Asians, they have a different body type like me, right? Like we're kind of evened out. And this Asian guy, like he trained so hard. There's like a video on it, and he like surpassed so many obstacles, and he reached that level that he thought and nobody thought he could ever reach.
Right.
And one of the things that blew my mind, I wanted to bring this up to you because I think you would appreciate it. He changed the leg that he started off on when he was like the leg that you start from when you're about to sprint.
Right.
He switched legs. And so he started training himself on his other leg starting. And what that did was it confused, or I guess there was like, so basically like muscle memory, from the way I understand it, there's a threshold that you can get to. And once you get to it, your muscle memory almost holds you back no matter how much you train. So what he did was kind of genius, and it blew my mind. And he switched legs in that simple detail of his routine, I guess, when it comes to actually sprinting. And by doing that, and now he was training his fast twitch muscles from that starting point, he was able to break through the threshold that he was originally at, and he became faster.
Yeah, so
that blew my mind.
Well, I'll tie it directly into the boxing. So when I train my clients, I'll always have them see, like, do you know what fighting stance you're in? Like, do you know whether you fight southpaw, orthodox, right hand forward, left
I'm
hand
familiar with those. I don't know.
I'm saying, do you know which hand do you fight with in particular?
No, and that's why I need to train with you.
So someone so stand up real quick. Do some type of shit, they push you, how you get your fight stance. So your left hand first. That's okay. So this left hand first. That's how I teach everybody, by the way. Is I literally tell them, I'm like, stand up, let's go.
Yeah,
what's up?
It's natural.
Right. So you being left hand forward, there's a like, have you ever thought about why you went left hand forward instead of right hand forward?
I always think about stuff like that.
So
I don't know.
Yeah, so human beings, we didn't evolve to box each other, to fight each other like this. But the stance that you're in that orthodox is physically conducive for your back hand, your right hand, to throw objects. But as a punch, you're just throwing a punch, right?
Right.
So if I'm throwing my punch in that orthodox, it would be equivalent to the physics of throwing a spear, or like throwing a rock, or like throwing an object, right?
That makes sense.
And if you're left-handed, you would be left hand back because you'd be throwing it with your left hand. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Or you'd be throwing a back powerful punch with your left hand. Majority of right-handed people fight orthodox, which is left hand forward, right hand back, and left-handed people are southpaw, right hand forward, left hand back. So if I have somebody who's orthodox, I'll have them train for a couple weeks straight in their orthodox position, get them super comfortable and familiar in their orthodox, and out of nowhere, I'll switch it to the southpaw to force that muscle confusion.
You're a good trainer.
Dude, and then we go from that southpaw, they then have to reteach themselves, but now they at least have the physics in their foundation to understand how to teach themselves from this position, as opposed to me having to teach them from that original position. Twisting their back foot into their twos, stepping into their jab. They then can switch to the other stance, be a beginner again, but have the foundation of learning it in their original stance and could be more familiar when teaching themselves or getting better in that new unfamiliar position.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you explaining that's crazy because that's something explicit I teach to all of my clients, but even more explicitly the clients that want to get better at boxing. They want to get better at the sport, not just doing it for cardio. When they want to get better, I go, okay, let's get the skill. Let's push it past that threshold and switch it up on them to where they have to prove that they have mastered at least the understanding of what it is they're doing to such a degree that they can replicate it in an uncomfortable opposite stance.
Yeah, exactly. And that applies to a lot of sports if you think about
basketball,
it. Everything,
dude.
right?
Basketball, I would teach. Chris Paul had a video on YouTube when I was like 14 of him shooting right-handed.
Yeah.
And he said, I'll do the same thing. I'll think about the movement of how I'm spinning the ball, about how it's releasing off my hand, everything, but with my left hand.
Yeah.
And by doing that same thing when you're dribbling with that same intention, right hand, left hand. And then you develop that fluidity from an ambidextrous standpoint to be able to throw orthodox or throw southpaw or orthodox or shoot a basketball right-handed or shoot a basketball left-handed. Or the Chinese man off the blocks being able to go off the right foot or the left foot, depending on which one he finally broke the records or beat that threshold in.
Yeah, I love that. And this actually reminds me of something interesting too. I was one of my favorite moments from a Bruce Lee interview. And it was actually the famous interview where he brings up be like water and stuff like that. But it's funny to me, there was like so many other interesting parts in there that aren't really highlighted. And one of them, he speaks about how to honestly express your body and like express yourself. And he says this is a lot harder than people think. And when he says that, what he's trying to say, when you think you do it, when you think you are. And the way I relate this is I tell people to look at animals, because animals follow their instincts. There's no
rational cognition.
Yeah, there's no excess in their minds, right?
Right.
They're just going based off of instinct. So when you think about it, if we really did get in tune with our intuition and our, what's the word I'm trying to find? Your reflexes or whatever emotion or energy that your lizard brain is telling you at this present moment, you instantly do it, just like an animal or like a cat would.
Is there anything in particular that you think of, like when you're referencing that? And
so, in my opinion, it's like if you just threw me out in the wild, or actually, you could put me in an urban environment like a city, and I would completely break free from all social constructs at that point in time. And if I wanted to run up a set of stairs immediately, I would just do it. If I wanted to sprint through a hall, I would just do it. If I wanted to creep and sneak through a room, I would just do it. If I wanted to sniff around, or I don't know, whatever, just weird stuff that people would consider extremely weird if they saw you doing it in society.
Beyond the confines of socialization.
Just doing it. And I think when Bruce Lee talked about it, he actually made fun of martial arts, because he's saying a lot of it was a lot of flash and a lot of cockiness. And he said this is all fabricated. If people really fought with martial arts or whatever, fighting, if you actually fought with your instinct, it just looks different than someone trying to make it look pretty.
Are you familiar with Jeet Kune Do and like what his fighting style was about?
Not, no.
So Jeet Kune Do was Bruce Lee's labeled fighting style that he adopted in.
Is that like the?
Yeah, so just the way he fights, right? Yeah, I like that.
I love that stuff.
Like the way he fights.
Yeah.
The style is called Jeet Kune Do, but it was essentially, it was an amalgamation of all of the practical parts of different martial arts in one, expressed through the authenticity of whichever individual is practicing it. So Bruce Lee didn't think that like your Jeet Kune Do and my Jeet Kune Do were the same thing. We both practice Jeet Kune Do if we master our own unique martial art as an accumulation of all martial arts. And Bruce Lee was such a fervent believer of martial arts as a moldless form, like you're talking about. It wasn't bound by certain rules, flash, all this stuff. It was a boundless, moldless art, essentially. Bruce Lee believed if you were in a fight, you could gouge eyeballs, you could you could grab nut sacks. Like, you should be more primitive, right? But again, Jeet Kune Do at that point wasn't an expressive martial art for competition per se. It was more so a lifestyle to get you from one form of non-expression to an ultimate form of ultimate expression, which is that individual form of you as a instinctual human tapping into the most unique version and part of yourself that in its most primal state, survival, fighting, using that martial art, being able to express it in its totality at its most, at survival at its most fittest. So that's what Jeet Kune Do was for Bruce Lee, essentially. And
so there's a method to the madness.
Well, I was going to say, and the idea of you talking about like being like water, being formless, like not having flash, like it all stems from this egoless perspective that at its heightened form, when you have to use that ego, you can still essentially survive and thrive no matter what society or nature throws at you.
Yes.
So, but yeah, that's dope that you fuck with Jeet Kune, or that you fuck with Bruce Lee.
Well, I mean, now that you can put it in context, that opens up my eyes even more to what he was doing. Yeah.
He would take a bunch of different martial arts. He'd be like, oh, that works for this. Oh, that works for that. Like Wing Chun.
And that's how it should be.
That's how it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, that should be the same thing with cultures. That's what religions were for the most part over time. It was taking the best qualities of the surrounding cultures, religions, and accumulating them into a master redacted religion that everybody can essentially
blueprint.
A blueprint for everybody to be able to relate to, essentially.
Absolutely.
Which all stems from the human condition, and we're all human, so it's not like they all fall too far from the same tree.
Yeah.
No matter what religion it is. But that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Right. When were you born? 1994? 95?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is that, 2 years after the first Intifada? Something like that? When was
that's
the first
a good
Intifada?
question.
1987 to 1993, I think.
My brothers would kill me since I don't know, but I don't know when the Intifada was.
So I'm 99% confident it was from 1987 to 1993. Did
you might be right.
Did your yeah, I mean, we could go into the whole.
Let's go, yeah.
Okay, before we go in,
whatever. I got time.
Was your family leaving Palestine a result of the first Intifada, you think?
No.
No? Okay.
No, my family left because my dad wanted a better life. And it was that whole immigrant
for sure
perspective.
Land of the free, home of the brave. America is this utopia for sure.
Absolutely. It's the land of the opportunity is what it is.
The greatest there's ever been.
Literally. And I think the difference between Palestinians and I guess I shouldn't say that, but Palestinians in general understand the value of the land that we come from. So when people like us come to America, we have the vision and goal to go back and build from there. You know? So it's like you're using America as a tool to come back to your homeland to build. That's exactly what they did.
So how familiar are you with the history of the conflict between Israel and Palestinians in the Middle East? And being Palestinian, I don't mean to ask that like arrogantly or patronizingly. I'm asking it like truly to kind of gauge like not only your life experiences, but which me and Cody referred to this in one of our last podcasts, where you have the empirical evidence and experience versus the rational evidence and experience. And I can understand the conflict from the rational perspective, but you can not only understand it from the rational perspective, being able to rationalize it, but also from the empirical perspective, because you've actually experienced explicit ties to the history.
Yes, absolutely. I would say in terms of history, I understand the general outline of my people's history.
Okay.
And Israel's history.
Could you walk us through
Jewish people's history and Muslim people's history. So, and Christian people's history.
Okay, well, without divulging into like a deep history of all of those.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the funny part, is that's what Palestine kind of is. It's like all that put together. But
if you'd read chapter 3 of my book, you'd realize the majority of that entire because it's chapter 3, which is divided into 5 subchapters. And each subchapter has 2 subchapters, essentially. History and religion. Mm-hmm. And I go from Mesopotamia to Egypt to Judaism to Christianity to Islam.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just saying
And then that's the thing. A lot of people can't separate Palestinians from a religion, and that's what they should do. Because
what's funny is, but it's the opposite with the Jewish people, right? It's like
it is.
It's the exact opposite.
It is.
Yeah, it's the association of religion with the ethnicity.
Yeah, and you know, that's actually the problem is when it comes to Jewish people, we have lived alongside them forever there in that Fertile Crescent is what we call that land, right? The Fertile Crescent.
At what time frame around is this?
From
where you're talking about at one point in time we were living alongside the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Like around what time is this?
This was before the inception of Israel, which was 1948.
Of course, right.
So,
which is their independence, but is your Nakba, right?
Yeah, and when they say independence, it's like,
that's what I'm saying. That's why for you guys, it's not independence.
It's not.
Because how many Palestinians were displaced right after
countless.
1948, right?
Yeah, countless. And it gets really deep. It gets to geopolitical and
right.
The thing is, there's an agenda, and behind this agenda is a group. Behind that group is a certain type of
lizard people.
Money structure.
For sure.
And behind that money structure, there's a few people left.
Right.
Right. And then, you know, you sound like a conspiracy theorist in back in the day, right? But now it's like kind of like common knowledge.
Well, it's certain facets of it is common knowledge, but there are still people who think it gets to the point of Illuminati and lizard people, and that's where it gets stupid.
Well, that's what they want, and that comes back to Tupac Shakur. Shout out to Tupac. And Tupac made the last album, Illuminati, because he's telling people, kill the idea of the Illuminati. Because if you think about it, all that bullshit, Illuminati and all that, that is, they're throwing it. The reason there's so many subliminal messages and there's so many imagery and there's so much satanic imagery and hidden here and there and all this other stuff, right? The reason that that's there is because you're supposed to notice it. They want you to see that. They want you to theorize about it.
Who's they?
So what I'm trying to say is, to kind of encompass that point I'm trying to make is, what Pac was trying to say, they're trying to make you fear that there is something out there that is secretive that you are unable to.
But who is they? But who is they?
And that's the question. So they really, you want to get down to it, it would have to come down to certain bloodlines of people. Okay.
I got you.
Right?
So you talking like Rothschilds, all that sort of shit?
The bloodlines, yes. And these bloodlines have a lot to do with control and power and all the good stuff, right? And these people are not, they don't fear God. When you have a certain level of wealth, you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna be challenged on every single moral aspect you thought that was ingrained in who you are. When you have all the money in the world, when you have no repercussions for your actions, when you have all the power, all the connections, when people are saying you need to make a decision that's going to affect and have a ripple effect on many countries for many generations for many different reasons, there's a certain power struggle in your mind that becomes real for a lot of people. And most people can't handle that responsibility. So most people turn evil. Is what I'm trying to say. The human condition you'll eventually become evil if you don't have fear of a higher power that keeps you in check. You know what I mean?
For sure. That's the whole story of Moses on the Mount, though, the Sermon on the Mount, of him coming down and seeing everybody worshiping what? Mm-hmm. Idol imagery, a golden bowl, materialistic stuff.
It's all because
they didn't have a fear of God.
It's and that's the human condition.
The imperfect aspects of the human condition. Bro, you need to just read my book. Like literally all this shit's in the book.
That's why I respect that.
Not the Illuminati stuff, but
I knew, and we've had a lot of like proxy convos about this because you mentioned to me what you wrote about, and that's why I've always understood what level you were trying to think on. And that's like being a Palestinian, coming back to that, you are in the middle of that storm of what's happening and that what's been happening. And so you kind of get an understanding of agendas and how people and religions and traditions and cultures and governments get used and get influenced and get channeled towards directions, whether it's directions towards themselves that create conflict, whether it's directions towards a new type of world, a new type of government, a new type of religion, a new type of ideology, whatever it is, they're being channeled by those people that want that to happen.
Okay, so tying this back full circle into the history. No, it's okay, because you got to realize I do understand a lot of the connections, the tangential connections you're making with all
we gotta give more context.
with the history of the Palestine-Israel conflict. But I get, before the audience, there has to be a little bit more, like you said, a little more context, a little more framing for them to understand the totality of the deeper stuff that you're kind of talking about, if you want to take it down that rabbit hole to the bottom of that iceberg.
Good point, yeah.
So with that being said, they in charge, power dynamics. How does all of that relate to the oppression of the Palestinian people, and where does that sort of begin?
That specifically begins, if you literally want to know where it begins, this is where I'm just speaking. I believe, from what I've read and what I've heard, a Rothschild, I'm not sure who, sent a letter. I believe it was before World War II or during World War I or after World War I, stating that they wanted to urge whatever body of government that was like kind of not government. You know how like there's a United Nations now that kind of deals with like the worldly affairs. This was sent to something like that, saying we urge that, you know, we want to give a Christian Zionist backed country. We want to create this Christian Zionist country under the gaze of the Jewish religion, which is Judaism, right? So
when did that happen?
That happened before, and that's where it gets foggy for me. I'm not sure exactly when.
So I'm not a big the layers of my expertise, especially with any sort of history, the further back you go, the more comfortable and excited I am to actually talk about my knowledge base. But what you're referring to is the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 was signed by, or was a letter sent from a foreign ambassador of the British Parliament to Sir Baron Rothschild, talking about, we have the ability for a mass migration back to the Holy Land for all of the Jewish people who've been persecuted over the last 20 or 30 years. Because really it was in about like the 1870s, late 1800s, a lot of Jewish people, and this is like some real stuff, a lot of Jewish people in Russia and in Eastern Europe were getting mad persecuted. And so what they And so what they were doing was fleeing persecution. And I think it was between like 1880 and like 1915 or 1920, there was like a doubling of the population of Jewish migrants that were otherwise there before. What then happened was World War I kicked off. And when World War I kicked off, it was the demolition of the Ottoman Empire finally coming to a close.
Yeah.
And the Ottoman Empire, what essentially happened was they were in control of certain regions, and there was a power struggle, especially within the Levant, within Palestine, that there was an agreement. And this is before the Balfour Declaration. So we haven't got to the Balfour Declaration yet. There was an agreement in 1916. The Balfour Declaration was in 1917. But in 1916, there was an agreement essentially in a correspondence of letters between, I think his name was Henry McMahon.
This is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but that's why the problem is, though, Mo, if you aren't fully confident in the information you're speaking on, you shouldn't talk on it as though you're 100% confident. You know what you're talking about. No, I'm just saying, be careful confidently espousing facts if you're not 100% confident in the facts. Sure. And the best advice I was given is you shouldn't even talk confidently on something unless you have 10 times the amount of information to talk on it. You being Palestinian, you have way more than 10 times the amount of information from the empirical side, but from the rational side, just be weary when making bold, brash statements. That makes sense?
Yeah, my siblings would like scoff because they know so much more in terms of that detail than I do.
It's okay. I mean, you know enough. I'm not saying anything out of pocket yet, am I?
No, not at all.
So just to kind of clear up what you're I think what you were trying to allude to is in 1916, the McMahon Hussein correspondent papers is what they were called. You had the Sharif Hussein Ali of Mecca, who's like the overseer of Mecca and like the unified Arab tribes and people of that region under the Ottoman Empire. So the Sharif of Mecca was essentially corresponding with the UK in these papers with one of the colonels or one of the head ups of the British Army to the Sharif of Mecca, to Hussein, was, we will give you guys specific land within Palestine, and we will acknowledge you as as an Arab state, as the state of Palestine, if you rebel against the Ottomans for us and quell their power so we can then come in and take the land.
Yeah, and what right did the Brits have to even have right to that land in the
but
first
no,
place,
what they were doing was, but what the Brits were doing is they weren't trying to claim the land. They were
They didn't want the problem.
No, but they
didn't want that problem.
So they promised the Arabs.
Right.
They said, "We'll give you this land if you help us get rid of the Ottomans." Right?
Mhm.
But what the Ottoman Turks? But what ended up happening is that same exact year, the French and the British signed a secret treaty. This was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the Sykes-Picot Agreement was, again, a secret treaty signed, which also had like Russia involved, Italy was involved, and what it did was it said, hey, remember that land we promised Palestine and the Arabs? Yeah, we're going to essentially give that to us, the British, and some of it to the French. And as a result of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in 1917, once the Ottoman Turks were kicked out, once their power was quelched, once their power was diminished in that region and they were kicked out essentially, in 1917, there was word from the British Parliament that signed the secret treaty that there was going to be British land in Palestine. So the Zionist movement that started 20 years earlier in 1987 by some guy named Herzl or something, essentially said, there's land that was promised to us, the British, what was originally promised to the Arabs if they would have caused the uprising, which they did, but we're going to give it to the immigrating Jews, that was the Zionist movement, to the immigrating Jews coming from Eastern Europe and Russia down to the Holy Land. And so it was a false promise that was violated from an original promise earlier that year in 1916 that was substantiated by a letter that you were talking about, the Balfour Declaration, that was a promise from a foreign ambassador of Britain to one of the prominent leaders of the Zionist movement in Sir Baron Rothschild, promising the land to the Jews after 1917, after it was signed in the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Interesting.
Does that all
like everything you were saying, I've heard,
you've come across before.
Yeah, and it makes sense when that's very impressive that you know it in that chronological order like that. I wouldn't be able to refer to.
Well, you would if you
I studied it, maybe. Yeah.
Well, if you took more of the rational approach to your empirical experiences, and if you understood that we have the data, the books, the internet, essentially to be able to give you the insight that you may have not otherwise been rationally privy to.
Well, this is true, but this is where it becomes, and this is, again, from being a Palestinian, all my life, I've had other people try to tell me my own people's history, and it's like,
do you feel bad about like me going kind of like retelling a history? Like I said, because I'm only coming from the rational perspective.
You didn't, and that's the thing. What you were saying is all probably true, and it is true. However, none of that has anything to do with my people's identity and who we are.
Of
right?
course, no.
I know, and
I was trying to get to how it started and where we got to, but that's a small part of the beginning. We haven't even gotten to the actual conflict.
Right, and I appreciate that, and that's the thing. You're giving the real context about what led up to the inception of Israel. And again, I don't know too much, but I know that the word Palestine was given to us by the Romans, right? That's from my understanding. Or they named us Philistines or something like that.
Kind of. And again, that's where having complete information just makes you more prepared to fully understand the full story rather than just one side, especially when one side, and I'm not saying the Palestinian or the Israel side, I'm just saying each side has their own respective data that may be over-conflating each perspective. The term Philistine comes from technically Peleset, which is an Egyptian term. And again, bro, read chapter 3 of my book. Like a lot of this stuff's in there. When the Bronze Age collapsed by the Sea People, and in the Bible, when they talk about the Philistines, there's technically two origins from the actual term Philistine, both in it as the non-Israelite the non-Israelite people of the Holy Land, which is like one aspect of the term Philistine, and the other one is those who invaded the Holy Land. And originally, the Philistines, the Pelisset people, the Pelicetines or something, the Egyptians, way before the kingdom of David, like the Egyptians mentioned, I think it was in like the second millennia BCE, the Egyptians, Rameses, one of the Rameses pharaohs, claimed that the people of Pelisset were the ones who were a part of the sea people who invaded Egypt during the collapse of the Bronze Age, when the sea people were invading all the surrounding Mediterranean area. So the term Pelisset is actually the stem root word, and we don't really know what it means, but it's just the people of that land type, like demarcation of those people of that region in Palestine, in the western bank of the Mediterranean and the Levant. And what happened was the Greeks, Herodotus even said this in the 5th century in 400 BCE, around that time, I don't know specifically what date, like if it was like 480 or whatever, but it was in the 5th century BCE. Herodotus mentions the same people of that region as Palestina. And so then the Romans, what they eventually did, whenever they conquered the Jews of that region, they started claiming that land for how the ancient people would claim that land, which was Philistina, Pelisset. So they called it Palestina. So the Romans called it Palestine. And then the Hebrew terminology for the Philistines, the Palestines, the people of that region, became separated into two forms. The Philistines of the Old Testament, or not the Old Testament, the Philistines of Genesis, and then you have the Philistines of essentially Judges and Samuel. And the Philistine of Genesis were the people, the non-Israelites that were of the Holy Land, but they were non-Israelites. They were the people that lived there but weren't considered Israelites. And then in Judges and Samuel, like with David and Goliath or Samson and Delilah, you have the Philistines that were technically called it starts with an A. It's like the Afakuyo or something like that.
So where did Canaanites come in? Or where did that name
Again,
come in? Is that before?
It's demarcating the land of Canaan. So you could say the Levantines, the Canaanites,
right?
The Israelites.
It's the same thing.
It's all the same thing. The Palestinians, right? But specifically the word Palestine, Philistine, comes from an actual historical term that was non-Jewish, non-Hebrew. It may have been Aramaic, but it was non-Hebrew because the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, claimed them as the Pelisset. And eventually the Hebrews demarcated it as both those that were essentially almost like how Palestinians today identify them, people of the land, but are non-Israelites.
Yeah.
But also the Palestinians who invaded, the invaders. And I think a lot of the time, especially when the Intifadas happened, when the 6-Day War of 1967, like when those things happened, it was more so the invader perspective of your people as a people and not as homely people that were also part of the Holy Land. Does that tie into sort of the history of, that's my understanding of Philistine from the books and stuff I've read.
And so like that, again, you do a good job putting all of that into context. And I think what's important to highlight is when you look at a people like Palestinians that have lived there for centuries and generations after all that crazy ass history happened.
Even Jewish Palestinians.
Because let's be honest, I mean, that part of the world is where the Crusades happened. You know, that's where so many different things occur.
It's where civilization started.
Right? I mean, kind of.
Well, not kind of. If we're talking about the entire Fertile Crescent.
Like Nubians. That's where like the first sort of.
No, Sumer is where most archaeologists ascribe the beginning of civilization to, even though neo-archaeologists kind of ascribe it to northern Turkey, like Göbekli Tepe and all these other northern.
So this whole time it's up there, not down next to Egypt. I thought it was like Africa.
So Africa is where we all came from in terms of like, nomadicism.
Right.
But agriculture in and of itself can only be set in places where there's fertile ground. And there was ancient Nubian societies, and the Kushites, I think. There was ancient Nubian societies. But there is no telling whether or not they may have been the ones who did the first Sphinx and did the first pyramids before the pyramids were built on top.
And that gets deep too.
100%. But the first written documents we have of society that we can prove is in Mesopotamia.
That
which
gets
is in
me
that Fertile Crescent
excited
region.
though. I mean, like,
oh yeah,
that's like, and this ties into another thing that I always talk about because I'm a very different Palestinian than most. But
Astaghfirullah.
why would you say?
No kidding.
Yeah, so it's like my interpretation of, because I am Muslim, my interpretation of Palestinians is we've been put on this earth to go through a certain test.
See, the only reason I wanted to give that historical context is because to only see the Romans labeling you as invaders and to only see all
they did that on purpose in a way, didn't they?
See, no, because the term Palestine, Philistine, doesn't have a foundational negative connotation associated with it.
I read somewhere there was a Jewish
Josephus, Flavius Josephus, who probably was the one. My bad. Go ahead.
No, you're saying I was saying I've heard from a Jewish source that I've talked to that name was given on purpose to make us sort of like, it was almost like a slight against Jews.
That's why.
Is that propaganda?
That's again, it's negative. It's a negative misinterpretation of actual history on both sides. Because there's a lot of Jewish scholars on the Jewish perspective on why Israel should be a state. They'll claim that the Romans, essentially because of Josephus Flavius, named it Palestine to spit on the people of that homeland. Even traditional Jewish people of the land who consider themselves Palestinians were essentially being smacked in the face with their own term. But no, that's only if you look at it as the invader term. The Peleset people were the people, non-Israelites of that land, which is what Palestinians are.
What we are, yeah.
You're Levantine Arabs of that region.
Yeah, and then isn't that funny? So like, you have people, and then you have these outside forces and agendas, and I think that's literally what encompasses this entire thing. Is like, we aren't enemies, with our Hebrew brothers and sisters, right? We aren't actual enemies.
Of course not.
Right? But all these different agendas and all these different things have led us to this point. And it's the Palestinians are the natural allies of all the oppressed people in the world. Every single oppressed people in the world, we are your natural allies. And that's why I've always been passionate about Black lives and the injustices here that happens towards Black people. And it's because I know what it's like.
Right,
I'm not Black,
oppressed.
but it's actually, and I've gotten like in arguments with friends about this. Black people are the most oppressed people in the world.
Why do you say that? Because
there is a prejudice against Black people in every culture in the world.
Why Black people in particular? And why do you say that?
And that's the question. And I think throughout history, in a way, Black people, because of their skin color, I feel like have been looked down on. And maybe it's out of all types of reasons, but from my experience, because like this is where people get it effed up, right? They look at America, and if they've only lived in America, they think, man, we are racist as fuck. Trust me, bro, you're not. You go to a different country and see how racist people are towards Black people. Like, see how much shit people are talking.
Well, what about South Africa?
That's a whole nother story. Like that, the apartheid and all that happened there.
My point is, I think it's disingenuous to give anybody the ultimate label of victim.
That's fair.
And I think it's being Black. I think it's more harmful to the Black community to give us this label as the most oppressed. Because I think everybody has their own respective level of oppression.
Yeah.
And I think it's just more evident or more amplified because America has a specific racial relationship between white people and Black people.
This is true. And I'm actually glad that you're being the opposite of what I'm saying, because I just think there's not enough representation of what I'm trying to say, which is like, just know that there are a lot of other parts of the world,
for sure,
that are much more racist towards Black people than any other race. That's what I'm trying to say.
I will argue any white person, any Black person, any minority, any person who's oppressed on this topic. As a mixed biracial kid, I was always too white for black people and too black for white people.
I've heard Logic say that.
So yeah, well, what's messed up is when Logic first came out, I was like, man, that's a good name to be a rapper. I kind of like that name. And you're mixed. I don't like this. But it was cool because I finally had somebody represent me. And I've never felt like I was a part of a team, because literally every time I go into the inner city and play basketball, I was a white boy. Mm-hmm. Every time I would talk naturally to my white suburban friends, I was considered black because I had a little Ebonics in my speech.
That's fair.
So I think when you talk about black people being the most oppressed, well, then what are mixed people? Because I think we're more oppressed than black people because we get it from both sides. Now, I don't think there's the same history, because I don't think mixed people have their own history. But I think deep down, mixed people's history is literally deeply intertwined with black people's history. So the discrimination factor, 1% drop rule or whatever, it's like no matter what, if you had a little bit of black in you, you were considered black.
And this is where I like that, you speak off of reality, because when you do think about it, as a mixed person, you have to deal with every side of the pond in terms of like the judgment, right? About you're saying you're too black for white, you're too white for black, stuff like that.
Team, no team is what I call it.
Yeah. So,
and the misfits. You know what I'm saying?
I mean,
there is no I mean. It's straight, except for it's Idi I mean. That's a whole nother conversation.
Wait, that's a lyric or something. What is that?
Well, you're thinking of Rakim, blow it up like Idi I mean, you know what I mean? But Idi I mean was a terrorist, I think.
Oh, terrorist. Oh, no, I'm just
kidding. But not that, yeah. Quotations. Well, I mean, the motherfuckers in the Munich massacre, like, they were terrorists, you know what I'm saying? Killed a bunch of Jewish people in the Olympics. Like, it's not, but guess what? A bunch of,
there's so many unreported
I know, and that's why
genocides of Palestinians, of Syrians.
That's why I don't want to start defending Israel. I don't want to defend Israel, but we have to
defend Israel, we'll fight.
Well,
even though I know I'll probably lose, but we'll
it's
fight.
not. I was gonna say it's not about defending Israel. It's about defending the truth and getting the full story and the full picture. That's why I was kind of going back into the actual history of things.
Israel itself, I cannot forgive Israel itself
as a state. It shouldn't exist as a state.
Exactly.
I agree. It goes against the theology of Judaism in and of itself. The kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of David and all that.
It doesn't even make sense in their own religion.
I agree, which is why I think you're kind of alluding to it being a Christian Zionist country.
It is.
Right, but
it's all about land.
So when did that happen? When did that happen again? Let's kind of go back into the context of how we even got to this point.
So so the first Intifada, and this is where like.
So I think we need to go even further back than that, though. We need to talk about like Yasser Arafat. We need to talk about the PLO.
He's very revered and when it comes to Palestinians.
So this goes into back when the term Palestine was even coined again by Palestinians. Like, do you think, real quick, when was your dad and mom born?
So my dad he's 67 now.
So he was born in 56.
Around the 50s.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, he knows a thing or two.
Yes, my dad knows a lot.
Right. So let's think of it like this. Do you so he would have been the first generation that called himself Palestinian. Do you think his parents were calling themselves Palestinians?
I do. And this is what's funny is there is actual proof of government paperwork, and there's currencies and all types of stuff before that generation that said Palestine on it.
The reason because I think like the recovering of the label, or Palestine was always what people in that region, but my Arabs in particular, from my understanding, didn't a lot of Arabs not like calling themselves Palestinian because of the Islamization of the region, especially under the Ottoman Turks, to refer to themselves more as Arab? So instead of being considered, I'm Palestinian, they called themselves Arab first. Am I wrong on that?
I wouldn't be able to tell you yes or no, because the thing is, when it comes to Palestinians, there's only so many of us. Because there's Jordan, then you have Syria, then you have Lebanon, and then it's like all these other countries. They're all there this whole time, right? But Palestinians in general, when it comes to my people, like where I'm literally from, I'm from a town called Ain Yabrud, and it's right next to Ramallah. which is like a big city.
Where at geolocally?
It's
more by Gaza or
no? It's northeast of Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. So kind of by the Western
West
Bank. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, it's literally about 15 minutes from Jerusalem.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that area of land, you know, when you go to my town, there are generations upon generations that go way before the 1900s.
Right, literally.
Of farmers and the indigenous people that literally lived in the tents and that had the sheep and the you know all the things that you would think existed back then for someone in that time. There were people like that, and that's where I come from.
Did you have grandparents? Like, do you know if you had grandparents or?
I do. I never.
I know you had grandparents. I was saying grandparents who experienced the more rural aspects of being a Palestinian in the early to mid 1900s.
I do, yeah. Okay. Because I've heard all the stories from my parents, and I actually knew, or I guess, you know, when I was a baby or a kid, I got to meet my grandpa, but then his grandpa, I heard the stories about his grandpa from my dad. And, you know, it's like, they were literally what that is. Like, you know, they were living off the land.
Right.
They're just honest, hardworking people. That's it. That's all. That's literally all it is. Like,
so, again, let's go back a little bit just to give more context. So, 1800s, late 1800s, there was Jewish persecution in Eastern Europe and in Russia, essentially. So there was a mass migration of Ashkenazi, I think that was the term for them, of those Eastern European and Russian.
By the way, we
welcomed 100%. And there was under Turkish Ottoman rule, there was more or less peace amongst the Christians, Jews, and Muslims in the Palestinian region.
Absolutely.
So in the late 1800s, there was a mass migration. And then in 1897, or around that time, there was the Zionistic movement that was started. And then you have fast forward to World War I. There was false promises made to Arabs of the Palestinian region and also to ethnic European Jews. And this is really where the tide turns because of that lie, that violation of a verbal agreement essentially between the Arab Palestinian people and the Brits at the time. That violation of an agreement then allowed for the Balfour Declaration, which hyped up and incentivized especially British Zionistic Jews, but Jews all over, especially European Jews, to migrate to the Holy Land. And I think it was between 1922 and 1937, the population of non-Palestinian Jews rose from 10% to like 27 or 29%.
When?
From 1922 to 1937.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was around right after the Balfour Declaration, right, and the big mass migrations. So then, so you have 1916, end of the Ottoman Empire, the McMahon and Hussein correspondent papers, which were a lie to the Arabs. And then you have the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was the lie that allowed the French and the British to essentially have the land that they promised to the Arabs. There was a bunch of BS that happened because the Arabs were pissed off that they didn't get their land, justifiably so. Then you have World War II that essentially happens. World War II happens in 1937. From 1937 until the end of the Holocaust, essentially in 1945, you're only a few years removed until what? 1947, 1948.
There's a correlation there.
Well, 100%. And that's where I didn't want you to go into like near Holocaust denying. Some people are justified in talking about certain aspects.
That's not funny, but
it's not at all. But you understand.
Well,
you understand how there is some.
There is not.
I know. I don't want. That's why I didn't want to necessarily.
The Holocaust happened, but the scale is not true.
So, but don't start going.
It's not.
Don't start going down. The only 1.25 million Jews died.
No, it's not.
It doesn't matter if it don't matter.
It's not even that. It's like just like what you're saying when I brought up like a specific race is the most oppressed, right? There were a lot of races that suffered the same fate that Jews did. How about
this? 30 to 60 million Russians and even more Chinese were murdered.
Right.
So but we don't get taught that because again of the whole
it's the
Christian Zionist narrative. But again, without going into the conspiracy stuff,
no,
just
we're not going to
get
into that.
You know
we're not going to get into that. It's and that's not a reason And that should never be a reason for you to build a country on top of somebody else's country.
Of course, but
You
it
know what I mean?
allowed the empathetic violin stringing, the violin
Sure.
playing of the 1947 partition that essentially tried to say, all right, well, Israelites get their own area, Palestinians get their own area, and we'll use Israel as a international state. I'm not justifying them. I'm just giving the history.
No,
and then what happened a year later? A year later, what you're talking about is justified and substantiated with the whole conspiratorial stuff, because in 1948, May 14th, May 15th, 1948, I think it was May 14th, was the Jewish Independence Day, was Israel Independence Day. But 1915, just a day later, both Russia and the United States both declared Israel as its own state, which spit on the face of the Palestinians, which justified then Israel to do what? Start pushing out all the Palestinians in 1948,
with
the
American
Nakba,
equipment.
which was the Nakba, right? Which was the, what does that mean? The
Nakba is like the day of, it's like day of horror.
Yes, it's the exact opposite terminology for what the Israelites term that day, which is a day of independence, a day to worship.
Right.
So, but given that context, you then understand at least how we got to that point, because then from
tragedy, I believe.
Yeah, I think it starts with a C. I think it's actually the day of like consequence, or the day of it's the day of catastrophe. That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
catastrophe.
So 1948, you have the day of catastrophe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from 1948, there's about a 20-year gap until you get now we're getting into the 1967, when you get the 6 Days War.
Right.
And then you get the Israelites essentially winning. And because they won the 6 Days War, they went hella heavy, and they start pushing all over into Syria, all into the Sinai Peninsula. The whole Sinai Peninsula they pretty much owned.
Yep.
And then what happened from 1987 to 1993? The first Intifada.
Right.
And then I think it was the Oslo Accords or something that was signed in 1993, which Israel essentially then said, all right, we'll give some of the land back. Something like that,
they drew the green lines.
Exactly. But they start saying, all right, we'll give some land back, but they didn't really.
But then they kept doing settlements.
They just kept doing settlements, and they kept selling land and everything else that you were talking about.
They told New Yorkers, come take some land.
Why? It's okay. But giving the context, does that at least do it justice so people can know at least the history of the Palestinian-Israel like conflict?
Yeah, it does. And that's, yes.
Because then you have the second Intifada was 2000, 2005, and then that's where it was amplified to where we are today, essentially.
Yes, exactly. And again, it's like when you, so to relate it to some listener out there, if you're an American living here, it's like, well, imagine somebody coming to your land and then you're just like, well, all right, we're not dealing with this anymore, and then you fight back, right? And then you lose, and then all of a sudden now you're under occupation,
right? And so that's giving context to the Intifadas. Right. And again, I want to make sure when we're explaining this that we're giving the audience a little bit of context.
And I appreciate you. I mean, the fact that you know all this is very respectable. But
we used to talk about this back in the day, remember?
I know, and that's the thing.
We were like 14,
and I still can't even like regurgitate it all and spit it back like the way you do. I can't, but I can only, like you're saying, that other part, I can only speak from my own
empirical evidence
of where, because I lived there.
Exactly.
I literally used to walk out as a child to my front porch, and there would be jeeps of Israeli soldiers sitting in the front of my house, chilling, while my mom's picking, tomatoes to the right. And those are my memories. Like they have the guns, they got the uniforms.
Do you know the history of how the Israeli defense,
the IDF?
Do you know how they got started? The Israeli Defense Forces?
Man, it's probably some deep shit.
So just real quick, I just remember this as a factoid. I think it was the Jaffa riots in 1922, maybe 1920 something. Maybe it was 1930s, maybe earlier than that, but I'm pretty sure it was the 1920s. I think it was called the Jaffa riots. There was a bunch of Palestinian Arabs who were sick and tired of the oppression that they were facing, and they rebelled and they killed, I think, 40. They didn't just go out and kill. There was a fight. There was a
when you say
uprising.
Arabs, who are you referring to?
Arab Palestinians.
Really? What time?
These were Arab Palestinians who were being persecuted. They rose up just like the Intifadas.
Right.
But it was called the Jaffa riots. And as a result of the Jaffa riots, the Israeli government created the first task force. They were called like the Habana or something like that. They were the first task force to essentially quell any sort of Palestinian uprisings. And then it wasn't until post 1967, after the 6 Days War, I think, is whenever the actual IDF was established. But just give a little history to the IDF. And that's why the reason Israel justifies
Occupation.
Exactly the exact word I was looking for. The reason why Israel justifies their occupation starts and stems from those very first riots of Arab Palestinians uprising against the injustices of their oppression.
Right.
Post the violation of a promise that was made to them under false pretenses. So
yeah, and this is where it gets interesting because I don't know. Have you ever watched Attack on Titan before?
No. The giant anime people,
the Titans and stuff. Yeah, it's like I relate to the Eldians, and then to me, Israelis are the Marlians, and it's just like it's the same story that's constantly told over and over again. This one attacked first, and then this one attacked second, and then now it's like a constant cycle of hate and war and bloodshed for generations.
But is that specific and unique to the Israel-Palestinian conflict?
It's much more complicated, I guess.
Nah, see, again, now we're going back into giving people victimhood trophies and giving them the most pinned, giving Palestinians, giving Israelites, giving that whole region more victim oppression award than anybody else who has faced that. And the only reason I'm saying, what about Bloods and Crips in inner city LA, or the BDs and the folks in Chicago?
Yeah. And
it's the same. It's the honor cultures. Yeah.
And this is what I was gonna say a while ago. When I think personally, what my test is on earth is when you are a Palestinian and you are a part of this huge story and conflict and just oppression, it's easy to look at yourself and think that, you're unique or you're special or that you deserve all the attention, you deserve the justice, when there's so many other parts of the world that go through the same thing.
Injustices, right?
Injustices. But we are sort of the pinnacle in a way because of the circumstances and the way that everything happened in history.
Okay, that's fair.
That's fair. We've become like the poster child almost of everything. Right?
That's fair.
And it's because of that part of the world and what it is and what it means. Right?
100% with the Crusades and everything else.
Yeah. So my thing has always been, I've always wanted a one-state solution. Okay. And this is not a very popular opinion, but I've always wanted, I don't give a shit what you want to call it. You want to call it Israel? All right, call it Israel. How about you open up the highways? How about you let my economy flourish? How about you actually give us, a chance to not have to worry about checkpoints, not have to worry about cutting off our water supply for random reasons, and, not have to worry about you just entering my house for whatever reason you want and taking me away and then saying, well, we have suspicions and now you're going to be in jail for a year and I can't say shit, right? That's like an example of how racist Israeli society is in a way, and like the way that they've structured it, right? Because how can you claim that you are the democratic society there, that you're the one that wants peace and freedom, but yet you have all these other measures in place to keep ethnocentric Jewish descent people as the top dogs in this entire societal structure that you're building. And then you go into these cities and you rename them. Like Tel Aviv wasn't even called Tel Aviv. I forgot the name that it was called before that, but there was a different name there first of all. And this is where it comes back to like, these are not actual Jewish descendants that they're claiming to be. These are people that have came from the European side of the world. And
what if they had European? What if they're from the European side, but they could trace their history back to Palestine?
That's completely fine.
Judea.
Why does that mean?
Right. No, I'm just saying.
I'm
saying, but what if they could? Then would they be like, even though they're white and they may be considered, I don't know if they would be Ashkenazi or Sephardic. I don't know how those terminologies really work. But what if they were, let's say, Polish Jewish, but they could trace that 4 generations back, or 5 generations back, however many generations back, they had family from Judea that got kicked out from a diaspora of some kind.
That's fair.
Because that's what most Jews, that's what they ascribe.
That's what they're saying.
Right. They ascribe their Jewishness to the diaspora of like 72 AD.
Well, okay. And but that's okay. So that's the thing. Like if you go back that far.
That's all I'm saying, yeah.
If you go back that far, you can't tell me that there were this whole time that there were Jewish people from that time,
right? No,
that still live there.
I agree.
Right?
Trust me, I agree with you.
That weren't kicked out.
I'm just saying that's the argument that non-Philistine Jews would try to argue to justify their Jewishness being from Judea before.
So come through,
100%.
Come through, build your house legally.
Right, exactly. And that's where it all boils down to, is the legality of the occupation.
Exactly. And that's, that's where it gets, you're on the wrong side of history. I don't care who you are and what reason you have. Israel's on the wrong side of history, and they know it, and it's like, we're at the point now in time, and especially now, everything is kind of speeding up. The world is starting to see and understand that it's about resources and power, and morals don't really matter as much as people think they do, as long as there are systems that exist like they do now. Nothing is going to actually change. It's just the way it is.
I think a lot of this boils down to, you keep saying a lot about my people, them, us, they. Kind of when re-referencing when we talked about me being biracial, being team, no team, I see it almost childish for people to be so identified in their group.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I have
okay, good, because that's actually the problem when it comes to the no peace in the Middle East, racism in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Was that shaking of the head like you don't agree?
No, yeah, I don't.
You don't agree with that? You don't think tribalism is the actual reason why, and team versus team is the actual reason why teams are fighting?
I think you're focusing too much on the tool and focusing less on the perpetrator that's using that tool.
No, I'm not.
Because human beings...
I think you're focused more on as if there's 5 people involved.
No. So let me...
causing all this shit.
Let me clarify. So I think it's extremely important to have an identity and identify with that specific identity.
I agree.
Right? So okay, I'm glad we're on the same page.
But do you think you should conflate that identity with your group?
Conflate? What do you mean?
Do you think because you're Palestinian that you should nearly identify or associate everything that's most Sabla with Palestine?
No, that's impossible. I couldn't do that.
So with respect to Mo Sabla, you're more than just Palestinian.
Absolutely.
So your identity isn't just Palestinian. And my point is...
No, it is.
Oh, so this feels like I'm Patrick. It feels like you're Patrick and I'm Rayman. This is your wallet.
Listen, the reason I say that is this comes down to like DNA. That's your identity.
Okay, but now we're talking about ethnicity.
Yeah.
So ethnically, you're Palestinian.
Yeah.
You'll never change that.
No.
But to even call yourself...
I wouldn't look like this if I wasn't Palestinian.
100%. Right. And I wouldn't look the way I look if I wasn't a biracial product of if I wasn't a mulatto byproduct of multiple different races.
Hybrid.
Just you know what I mean? I think the problem is, Mo, we get too caught up in the extremes. And I'm not saying it's bad to only...
This is ingrained in our society.
And that's what I'm saying, even you and I in this conversation. I'm not saying it's bad to be Team Palestine or even bad to be Team Israel. Yeah. I'm saying it's bad if the crux of your entire identity revolves around the team that you ascribe to. And I'm saying that as somebody who's never been a part of a team.
I agree.
And I had to find my own identity, which was a very, very struggling and trial and tumultuous thing for me to do, especially having no team to identify with. If anything, the teams I thought I identified with never allowed me in because I wasn't black enough or white enough.
In retrospect, I went through that in a way. Personally.
Like not being American enough or not being Palestinian enough?
Both, literally. Right?
That's fair, because I assume as an American Palestinian,
I mean, you
two homegrown Palestinians, you're two American, and
dude,
here...
you have no... Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
And you saw me walking around the hallways back in high school. You know, I mean, I was not... I couldn't identify with anyone at that point, right? Like,
but you could identify with Arabs and immigrants, couldn't you?
At that point in my life, no. I was a completely different person. I was actually a very spiteful person, as I'm sure you can probably remember some things I used to say.
Oh, yeah.
I was very spiteful towards identity. I was very spiteful towards religion.
That's fair then. I think it's disingenuous for me to... It's almost like me playing the ultimate victim card, being like, but you don't know what it's like to be team no team because you at least got Arabs.
But
it's
see,
like,
you're smart enough to understand that quickly, okay? And that's cool, and that's great. And I agree with your intention about where you were going with that, because at the end of the day, we are all the same, and that's how it.
We're all team human,
yeah,
right?
And this is actually. Have you ever played Halo?
Oh yeah.
I did a presentation on this in college. Crazy. I had some balls doing that on Halo, and I stood up there and I was like, "All right, when you look at all the races, or all the alien races in Halo under the Covenant, they all achieved such a magnificent, organized way of existence, of achievement, of a direction, because they had a blueprint, which was the covenant, right? They had the prophets,
100%.
right? These are important. These are important things to understand as a human being, because when you understand that, yes, our tribes are different, yes, our identities are different, just like the elites are different from the grunts, and then the grunts are different from the hunters, and
they're still part of the same covenant.
They're still part of the same covenant,
right.
And that's why I believe in my religion wholeheartedly, because I want people to know, listen, man, like, that we all want the same thing. We all can achieve the same thing if we're all under the same gaze, under the same blueprint, under the same covenant. Then we're able to become, like Elon Musk is saying, which is an interplanetary species, or whatever the term is, right? We can become that, but we have to have a blueprint, a structure, a framework that we can operate off of.
But how do we get that identifying in individual teams?
And well, that's what being a Muslim is. That's what being a good Christian is you are sacrificing the self for the greater good of the whole.
Right. But every time I hear you, or even when I heard you almost downplay or disagree with me saying being a part of any team, identifying your entire identity with the specific team you're ascribed to,
it's important.
But that's the thing. You're saying it's important, but it's what caused Zionism to do what it did to Palestine, and what caused the Palestinians to do the Intifadas and to rebel back and cause the back and forth and the back and forth.
You don't think it was
humans, powers that be, controlling people, and all
human emotion 100%. And ego, and
it's manipulating those. It's manipulating those things. But I'm saying those things, the fact that they can be manipulated, is the whole purpose and point. If you, Mo Sabla, identify your identity strictly or more primarily or in its totality with your Palestinian team, then you allow the powers that be to then manipulate you as that person, a part of that team.
Generally, you're right. I am not the general majority. That's
why I think you should be careful, because it causes cognitive dissonance if you say I am part of the Palestinian movement, but I'm also unique in my own facet.
Well, be careful now. I'm not in any movements, but
100% I'm you tell me be careful, watch your mouth. I'm kidding.
I'm a part of, I know who I am and where I come from. And the reason I'm saying that it's important for you to identify with something is because everyone has a specialty based on where they come from, based on the generational trauma.
For sure.
Right? And all the shit that bloodline has led up to you, right?
100%.
Understanding that and knowing, okay,
is important. I agree.
Right. And then, but identifying with it means that, and this is where it gets deep, because when people talk racism, when you're racist, and ist is, you're implying that you're almost like a specialization, right? You're an ist, you're racist, right? So racism isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's bad because it was used as a weapon to enslave people. It was used as a weapon to hate each other. It was used as a weapon to create wars. It was used as a method of violence, of prejudice, of separation. But racism, being proud of who you are and your color and your race and your ethnicity and your culture and your tradition and all these things, having that proudness, having that that belief in who you are and where you come from, because that's the whole point. God created us in tribes on purpose because.
What tribe am I part of then?
And that's where it gets interesting for you because
that's where it gets interesting for the majority of the population, because by 2040 we'll have such a melting pot of people. You're not pure Philistini. You got Arab in you, you got African in you, got a bunch.
You never know, yeah.
But you never know. Take a DNA test, and I think deep down
that's where it gets interesting. I'm glad you bring that up.
Do you think you're full 100% Philistini?
I don't think that's possible.
I don't exactly. That's my point.
But again,
so to identify as being I'm a part of this team because technically it's the closest thing and I can identify with. I do wholeheartedly understand the importance of that. I'm saying the degree to which you harp on that as being your identifying marker for your identity is very toxic and is very limiting. That's all.
This is where I want to.
Very limiting.
I'm glad you say that, and this is where I want to tie this up. I identify as a Muslim. I'm a slave to Allah at the end of the day. That. And I think, again, that's why I was mentioning the test for Palestinians, the proudness of being a Palestinian, the arrogance sometimes of being a Palestinian. That is Allah's test for us, because we have to make sure we're thinking of the bigger picture of Allah, that's not fair. Where we come from. So I'm glad you're giving me that, that you're constantly reminding me of that, because that's exactly who I am and what I want to be. That's what I want for everyone.
And that's what a Muslim is someone who submits to something greater.
Exactly.
And that's the whole point, is not submitting, though, to just because I was born in Ethiopia or just because I was born in China or just because I was born in Mexico.
Agreed.
It's like, no, you were born as a human being under the specialized uniqueness of God's creation, being made in God's image, which isn't specific to any race, ethnicity, or culture. It's unique to us as an entire species.
Yeah, that's a species.
So I think here's what's messed up. I think me, and this, we can kind of nip it in the bud here. I think me being biracial and never having a team to be a part of, I see things so clearly from the absolute individual perspective, because I literally have never had a team to be a part of, that it's easier for me to dismiss any team that I would have otherwise been a part of. It's easy for me to dismiss my blackness, let's say. It's easy for me to dismiss my whiteness, per se. It's just easier to dismiss those things because I've never had a specific ardent anchor to identify my identity with.
That's real. That's real as fuck. Yeah.
Man, that's a good conversation.
Yeah.
My bad. Let me finish one more time. What were you going to say?
No, that's something that I don't have an answer to, really. It's because I have that privilege of not being mixed.
Right, but you were able to understand
based on my situation,
based off your own unique situation, especially being an Americanized Palestinian
during literally the 9/11 era.
Man, right. During the 9/11 era, which was during the Second Intifada, right?
Yeah.
Which again doesn't do the truth of history any justice when you don't know the totality of why people would have even uprose during those times. Because it'd be easy for media to just dismiss it as people are fighting and rebelling. Right. But it's like, what is the conditions under their rebellious fighting?
Yeah, and this kind of, I think, maybe a segue. My philosophy of life is I'm a very simple person. I think we're definitely living beyond our effective nature. I personally believe.
What do you mean?
I think as a human being, you only need so much, and it's kind of this philosophy can live in many different places. And like, for example, when you read like a book like Think and Grow Rich, right, by Napoleon Hill, they talk about how thoughts are things, and what you think you become, and sexual transmutation, and making sure that you are aware of how the sexual energy exists within you.
Sexual transmutation?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Really?
I just don't know. Well, I mean,
I would love to talk.
I know what the word I assume I know what the word transmutation means.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're transferring or you're transforming your sexual energy into something constructive and positive.
Absolutely. So yeah. So in the chapter, I loved it. That book, that was like one of the later.
Like semen retention stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
it has to do with that.
Yeah,
It's a part of that.
I know FAP for 3 years, so
No,
remember
that's
yeah.
seriously important. And that's because you're holding back that physical sexual
Right.
desire, and that finds a place out. It comes out somewhere, right? It comes out in your thinking, in your creativity, in your action, whatever it
100%.
is. And you know, some people say, oh, like you glow when you are not masturbating, or you're glowing when you're holding back all this sexual energy, and this is what happens.
Just so you know, though, the studies show that they've done studies
can't confirm that.
No, studies have confirmed that, but studies have also confirmed the opposite. So that it's
Yeah.
there's no real science on whether or not semen retention honestly gives you all this extra. But
Psychologically,
I was gonna say, from a principle standpoint, from the psychological perspective, it
Yes.
instills discipline.
Yes.
It instills willpower.
yes,
And I think the sexual transmutation is just a piece of that entire puzzle.
is a
But it's a
piece.
crucial piece because we are sexual mammalian creatures.
right. It's a form of energy.
Yeah.
and, right. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like if you can channel that.
Airbend it is what I call it. Airbending your sexual energy into something
Seriously.
constructive and positive.
Yeah, I love the word channeling. You know, I use
Yeah.
that word a lot because that is what we are. We're a tool, because what are we doing right now? We're channeling our bodies and our mouths and our voices and our thinking and our conversations and our beliefs and our, everything we're channeling constantly because it's coming from somewhere.
Right.
Right. So yeah, one of the examples I was going to say briefly was he talked about how he had a secretary who was, a very beautiful woman, and he mentioned that reason of him having that woman around made him 10 times more successful,
Right.
because of that the ability for him to take that inspiration and using that as a way of, like, in your business and your career and whatever you're
Right.
doing, right? And that's why it's so important to have a pair, to have a woman, man in your life.
Right.
It's true. All right. All you people out there that are like, single life, single life. It's only good when you're developing yourself and coming to grip with your own weaknesses to a specific extent.
I was going to say, it's only good when you haven't developed yourself to be
Exactly.
qualified for a partner.
Exactly. Yes. And that's where you put a period.
That's it.
Honestly, it should not be any more complicated
That's what I teach all
or
my clients,
simple.
bro.
Yeah, it's literally it. And that's why when if you're in a relationship and you're both toxic, and then you get out of that relationship, and then now you're alone, and now you're facing your demons, and now you're understanding yourself, and you're becoming better and whatever, and you're growing, but then you hit the ceiling, and it's almost like, why should I even care about writing a book? Why should I even care about
reading a book?
becoming or reading a book? Why should I even care about making more money than I make now? I'm pretty content,
drive,
right? Yeah. So it's like, you have to understand that you're only human, and that you need that uncomfortable desire that comes when
comes when you're not coming.
when you're and you have that person there.
Right.
Good line there.
Nice.
And you have that person there to inspire that from you. I think that's extremely important.
Dude, what's crazy is what you're talking about is having something external to further fuel the drive and motivation for you to be able to actually manifest greatness into your life.
Yes.
Now, it's not that you need the external, because this goes back into like the Sermon on the Mount, right? You don't need the golden bull to know God exists. You got to know he sits at the seat of your heart. So you should know that deep down, you don't need that secretary. You don't need that sexy XYZ to give you the fuel, because deep down, it is internally right in here.
It's you, yeah.
But having the reminder, the external drive to remind you and push you, is just the cherry on top for people who already have the drive, but is a near necessary catalyst for people who don't. Yes. And so for me, when I'm training people, and this kind of goes into like the self-sustained training stuff, there's a difference in the clients I train, both before they come in and after, because of the level of accountability I'm able to facilitate them to them as an external source to essentially give them that drive, where once the flame is sparked, they then just have to be able to maintain it themselves. And that's the self-sustained aspect of the training. But it's being there as a beacon of accountability to remind them what they're capable of.
Yeah, that structure and framework is extremely important, and you being a source of that is incredible for making a difference in the world. I think that's very valuable. When it comes to marriage in Islam, that's considered half your deen, meaning you're fulfilling half your obligation to being a Muslim when you get married. And the reason,
well, half of it is the saying,
everything
you have
else.
to say what is the saying
prayers,
though? What is the
Hajj?
the Hajj?
Yeah.
No, the Hajj is the travel. What is the La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah? What's that actual phrase called? Like the initiation phrase to say like I accept God, there is no other God.
Man,
It's called the Shahada.
The Shahada. You know it, and I did.
La
Okay.
ilaha illallah
You're making me
Muhammad
look bad, but
stalker for lunch, you know that.
I should. Well, yeah, that's a good point. And so
that's one half. The other half is
There's
actually getting married, 100%.
yes, there is a biological necessity
For a man to be completed and
for
vice
a man
versa.
to be, yes, and exactly. So I think that's very kind of missed in today's world, in the modernization of relationships and the modernization of the way we think, and the independence of life, and like we're having much less kids these days.
100%. But let me ask you this: where does what was the average age of the Greek man that got married in 200 BCE?
Shit, I don't know.
Just random guess.
Probably like 18.
Hilarious. What was the average age of the girl?
Probably like 12 or something. No, I mean honestly, it's just the truth.
It was Aisha, but no. So
yeah,
so think about it though. Women were about around the age 15.
Mm-hmm.
Men were about the age 35.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was either gonna go long for the guy, and then
But most people, especially modern people, everybody I've asked this question to, usually always assumes both pairs are younger.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say it ties back to the reason that even happened was it's mainly because men they're looked at as sources of security, and then they're supposed to have multiple women that they can
Well, supposed to's
supposedly,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, it's just we can talk about
the king can have like 10 women,
right? But not
around.
everybody. The king was one person. Majority of humans weren't
Majority
kings.
of people couldn't do that.
No, majority
right?
of people had one person.
Yeah,
because that's what has stood the test for all of humans, not just the people who were in the minority who could have the polygamous sort of relationships. But and men pair bonding with women is different than women pair bonding with men.
Thank you.
And the best way to think about it is, I can get multiple girls pregnant, but a girl can only get pregnant by one man.
Absolutely.
That's the best way to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's right. That's why I think monogamy is probably that's where Islam and Christianity do differ a little bit. Monogamy instills, you want to talk about sexual transmutation, that's all monogamy is you may have the urge to want to have sex with multiple different women, but you realize, oh, the bonding sort of relationship I can garner with this one individual is so irreplaceable and is so fueling in the motivation it provides, I wouldn't even want to mess around with another girl.
So true. Yeah.
So I say all this because most people in the 21st century get caught up in thinking because they're 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, should I keep going? 28, 29, all the way until they're 34, thinking that they are qualified to even have a wife, have a girl, have a family. Have you built your empire yet?
Exactly.
Have you gone to war yet and substantiated yourself as a man and survived and thrived and shown that you can actually provide for your people?
What does Nas say? You're in your second childhood.
You feel me?
Yeah.
So it isn't until you're 35 that you're even qualified or should even think about being able to look for a girl. Before me and my girl got together, I literally was prepared to die alone.
You are the example. I think you're the exemplary example of that, because I've known you in your journey, and I really respect that. And I think that's the best way, because it's such a rewarding and peaceful transition,
Man.
right? Because you're just like, there's so many men out there now, especially in today's time, that are just getting into situations with women, and then they're just constantly trying to compensate for the shit that they haven't
had the time to experience and garner.
Exactly.
They're trying to compensate. It's like,
and that takes away from their development too.
Man.
And it eats away at their own ego
and their own self-worth and the amount of fulfillment they can achieve.
And that's when the dynamic starts to shift. And now the woman's looking at you like you're nothing.
Like, step your game up. Why aren't you providing? Why aren't you a man?
Look at this other guy that's like 34.
Right. Bro.
He has his shit together.
You know what I told my girl when we first got together? I'll show you upstairs. I'll show you my whiteboard. I'll show you the way my room's set up. You see how this is kind of set up. I said, I care about, and this was early in our relationship. This was like, we weren't even a thing yet. We were just like kind of in the beginning stages, right? Kind of feeling each other out. But I was so explicit in my initial stages of communication that I literally said, if you can find a man who can make you as happy as I make you, can give you the same emotional fulfillment that I can give you, can provide the same sexual compensation I can give you, you should find that man if he's old enough and established enough to be able to give you what you deserve right now, which at 22 is a family. How old was your grandparents when they had kids, do you think?
Oh, man.
But I'm asking you, I'm asking her rhetorically, but you can understand this also as if you're being asked.
Yeah.
They were like between the ages of 16 and 20. So then you got to wonder, biologically, she may actually be feeling, and I am considering this before I even have this conversation with her. So when I have the conversation with her, I can literally tell her, you're 22. Your grandparents were having kids. They had a family at this point in their life.
TikTok. So
there may be So there may be a part of you that almost feels unfulfilled because at 22, you don't even have that family yet, especially as a woman.
This is what's really messed up about our society, is the modernization of.
Right, but we don't, without getting into that, because we can get into that in the 1960s when
the
government
started.
Yeah, when the government literally wanted women to be independent taxpayers.
Yes.
And consumers.
Generation X.
Right, a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, sorry. How old are you right now?
25.
Yeah, you're in a good spot. You guys are in a good spot. That's a good age.
We're in an amazing spot. Dude, there's here. I'll just do this real quick. Oh, will you grab me that blue marker down there? Here, I got one right here. This is something I do with my clients. So I call this the DNA of relationships. I have a whole seminar on this. Because of COVID and all this stuff, I haven't been able to actually go out and do the seminars, but I do marriage counseling with people. I've had multiple people I've counseled in their marriages who are 35 and older.
It's like life coaching.
For sure.
You know?
Me being an ordained minister, that's essentially what I do. It's like therapy and counseling without being an actual therapist, because it's mainly through wellness consultations, right? But like I said, bro, 30, 40-year-olds I've counseled and done marriage counselships with.
Incredible.
And so as a result, it's not necessarily about me not having 10 years of being in a perfect marriage to be able to be qualified to have these conversations. It's having the knowledge and then the experience when dispensing that knowledge and seeing it actually work on couples, right? And then taking that same knowledge because I applied in my own relationship. But I call this the DNA of relationships. The way you need to think about it is females versus males is females are inherently valuable. They have inherent value, right?
Exactly.
Men, we have zero value when we're born. None.
Absolutely none.
Got to earn your worth.
Exactly.
Earn your value in this world, right?
Absolutely.
What ends up happening over time, though? Over time, men experience things and they eventually hit this inflection point where they start becoming more valuable over time through their experience.
I love the way that's, because it makes sense, right?
It's a little yin yang,
yeah. I like that.
That's why I said I got a whole seminar over this that I was going to present for. Anyway, women are the opposite, right? What ends up happening at that inflection point? That inflection point is, let's just say, 35 years, right? That's when men start becoming established. But that's what happens. What happens with women at 35 years?
Downhill.
But what specifically happens to their
ovaries dry up or something like
menopause?
Yeah.
They start hitting geriatric pregnancy. They start being at high risk for even having babies.
Right.
But men at 40, 50, we can keep having babies, right? Until I think it's about like 45, 50, which menopause is for women. Andropause is for men. Men start experiencing andropause, which means we start losing testosterone. Exactly. That happens like around 45 years old. It's about 10 years later. But as a result, we don't earn our value until we're 35. Women don't lose their value until they're 35. So the dynamic was usually these men got these women.
Aha.
So guess what?
The younger and the older. Yeah.
So guess what? Men nowadays want this while being down here.
Yeah. A lot.
So you know what I told my girl? You know what I tell my clients who are younger, who don't have the kingdom yet, whenever they're thinking about embarking on a relationship, when thinking about the DNA of their relationship, they have to consider, if you're going to be in this position, the girl, the second half of your life is in this position. Would you want your girl to make all these sacrifices just for you to get qualified? Because if you do and you're okay with that, you have to understand how much she's actually giving up.
Yeah, that's logic. Yeah.
And as a result, that should then what? If you're lucky enough, like me, to be able to find that early on, that should be that fuel you're talking about to get you to that kingdom way faster.
But you're like right there.
Well, you're never actually there, right? You're always building it. It's constantly being chased after, right? But you're right. Every year it's getting better and better and better and establishing the empire even more solid than it was the year before. But when embarking on a relationship, you got to realize most times you're not qualified because you don't have the experience on this earth to be valuable or worthy enough for that relationship.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's when it gets down to the nitty and gritty. What creates value for a man?
Right.
Your
right now it's
your income, your financial.
Now it's
situation,
it's 6-pack, 6 inches, 6 feet tall, and 6-figure income.
Yeah, I got most.
Mine's the 6 feet tall.
I don't have the 6 feet tall.
But does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so you're literally red pilling people, and that's amazing because I always like to use that term.
Nice.
It's Matrix.
Oh yeah, I like. Oh yeah, red pill, blue pill. Do you know?
Red pill, man. You gotta always choose a red pill. Especially when you're like me.
Right. What does that mean? You
gotta live with reality.
I like that. You know. But does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's amazing. That I like the way that you drew that. I think it looks like from the outside looking in at your relationship, I don't know anything about it. It looks like you're at that sweet spot of finding someone that this is relevant, but then you're in a certain maturity level that you can also benefit from, this other side of being a human in general.
That completion side as a Muslim, like you were talking about, having that marriage.
Well, that, yes, but I'm saying also another side is like, having that person that inspires you.
But I'm saying
gets you the
what you're talking about, that having that second half to inspire you, give you that motivation.
Yeah. That
is the part you're talking about in Islam where you're not complete unless you get married, essentially.
Actually, you're right. Yeah.
And as a result, brother, straight up, is the only way I even got to this position to be qualified to be in the position I'm in with my relationships, counseling, coaching people, all those things, is I've tried my best to live in truth. Pain. Addressing your traumas for what they are. Mm-hmm. But it boils down to you being able to crystal clear communicate not only with your people, but with yourself. Introspective rationale. And when you crystally communicate with yourself, it allows you the foundation of knowing yourself, of being qualified or worthy enough in your own skin to then be able to share that experience with another human. Then you can near selflessly always be intentionally and crystally communicating with your people. Except again, we're imperfect humans. So there is a level of like selfish lapse in there that we may not be privy to when it happens. And that's why we need that second half of us to counterbalance us when we get off our path.
Yes.
But knowing that deep down, you shouldn't even be seeking out that second half of yourself unless you've built the first half, which is in yourself.
Yes, it's very important. It's essential. It's very important. I always tell people, give yourself grace, because too many people are not giving themselves enough grace to go through these things, because you know that better than anyone else. You went through those years of the tough things, of the difficult things that led you to who you were, and it took a lot of struggle and time. And this is like that Gary Vee type shit, like when he's like, you got time, you're so young. If you fuck up for the next 10 years, it's okay, because after that, you might be able to find what it is that you truly want to do and be in life, right? And I think that that's kind of the same thing. It's understanding that no matter what you do, you have to acknowledge that this is a process and that you're going to slowly try to understand it. And it comes down to confidence and attitude. I've always been the type of person that no matter who I'm talking to, no matter who is above me or under me, my attitude towards them is, I'm learning from you. I'm here with you in the trenches. I'm here to understand what it is that you want me to understand. I got this compliment that I've never gotten before from a higher up, and they were like, we get it. You're really new and you're learning a lot, and trust us, you're doing great. We think one of the good things about you is that you have a high level of EQ, and I didn't know what that was at first.
Your emotional quotient.
Yeah, and I think you have that too, right? So, and it kind of contextualized my being all my life. That's who I am. I'm always emotionally empathetic and curious, and I'm trying to understand always. And I think that's extremely important. Having that attitude of wanting to understand, of wanting to feel you and wanting to, you know what I mean? So,
because how can you get better unless you actually want the change?
right. And that's starting with acknowledging your ego and where it starts, acknowledging where your insecurities come from.
Right.
Understanding, your shortcomings, understanding maybe you have problems with your anger, your short fuses, things like that, rage, trauma, all types of things. These all take time. They're all a process.
When you said what?
It ties into entitlement.
Right. Exactly. Because guess what? When people come in here, they think they're entitled to, hey, I'm getting a workout, make me better.
Yeah.
It's like you ain't entitled to nothing but the work you put in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it doesn't matter if I'm training some of the top lawyer clients in Kansas City or if I'm training my boys. It boils down to holding everybody to the same level of accountability that they should hold themselves to. And it's unique for each individual.
Right.
But holding yourself to a standard, because deep down, before you even come to me, that you want the change.
When I look at your training and workouts, I understand that the amount of the benefit that I will have from training with you is exponentially more than any sort of training I could do that has to do with, cardio or your basic, like workouts, and somebody in your ear telling you like, do this, do that. Why are you stopping? Stuff like that. Yours is in a different level because of everything that we just kind of talked about. You instill the mentality. You also instill a valuable skill, which is fighting.
Right, self-defense.
And that ties into your entire physique. It makes your physique change because being able to throw a punch, even if you're a bodybuilder, you don't necessarily have the physique to be a fighter. Right. So that I acknowledge all that, and that's the reason that I want to do it.
I was gonna say that's why I've never pushed it on you though.
Yeah, and and yeah, it's like,
and your effort will be reflected, or your interest will be reflected in your effort.
right.
And so you actually reaching out, being like, all right, I think I'm ready. You having gloves ready to go. You having your schedule in line. So when I ask you, well, what does this week look like? And you're like, I can go tomorrow. I go in at 2:00, so I can go anywhere from, I need 30 minutes to get ready at work, and I live 15 minutes away, so I need to be out of here by at least 1:00. So
it's not gonna work.
But I listen, that shouldn't be specific. I don't know your schedule, so I don't even know how to make it specific. I'm just saying, as a gross, exaggerative example of your interest, your effort should be one that you're deducing the intricacies of your day to day to ensure that you're able to get in here.
That applies to every facet of life.
Of course, but that's why I have clients backed up until July, though. That's why I have people legit constantly in and out, because there's a level of irreplaceable accountability that you get whenever you finally find a place that works for you.
Yeah.
And this isn't for everybody. No. And if you were to come in here and check it out, and you were to, let's say, be a little overwhelmed and taken aback by the level of intensity that it actually is, I wouldn't feel no type of way whatsoever.
Right.
Because I understand and I live in the truth of that. But I think it would be doing you a disservice if I were to hold you to any standard other than what I would hold you to when you're in here. And that standard is one that makes you feel uncomfortable. And everything you talked about way earlier in the podcast was what? Getting comfort in that uncomfort. Fighting through the trials of life so you essentially understand the fruitfulness of the life that you have, even though it may have been riddled with suffering that was unaccounted for or non-asked from your position.
Absolutely.
Why do you think I run out in the snow with my shirt off and stuff?
I love that, by the way.
I do all that stuff because I voluntarily suffer because of how easy it is to live in the 21st century, especially in the West.
Yeah, my brother, he has his own little famous quote. He's like, pharaohs didn't have AC.
Think about it.
Stuff like that.
Legit though, that's the way to think about it. Every time we're in here with my clients and they're like, "It's hot, Mitch. I need some water." I'm like, "You need some water?"
Yeah,
you're tired.
You think you're tired.
We got AC conditioning right here.
Yeah.
Let's go outside and box.
And see, this is what makes great leaders, is all the stuff that you mentioned. Having that ability to hold people accountable is extremely important to being a leader, because a lot of times if you're a pushover, or if you're too concerned with other people's feelings or their interpretations of you or their own life,
right,
then you're never able to keep those philosophies and that structure. You're never able to actually practice that.
Never able to. You're never able to be secure in the confidence that's required to procure that leadership.
Exactly. And that's something that is extremely important to be a real leader.
Especially in the 21st century.
Especially in the 21st century, when everyone is just trying to please each other.
Right.
At the end of the day, like when we have a conversation,
right,
I'm just trying to agree with you.
Right.
I'm just trying to make you laugh, or you're trying to make me laugh.
Or it's the fear of missing out. I need to add something because I feel like if I'm not adding value, then I don't have value. Right. It's like, no, if you don't know anything on the topic, shut your mouth.
Exactly. If you're
willing to listen.
Yes. Active listening.
Active listening. Yeah.
It's very important.
Mo, this conversation, brother, I think there's going to be a lot more concept for us going forward in the future.
Inshallah.
I can confidently ascribe a lot of these traits and a lot of these accolades that you're kind of bestowing upon me and giving me praise for. I can confidently ascribe them to you as well, and that's why you can identify them so well. But guess what? It's not about just having the qualities. It's not about you and I having the genetic potential, having at this point, the potential because of our life experiences, the way we were raised, everything else. None of that matters. It matters what we're doing each and every single day to ensure that we don't fall off that ball of optimization. So when we look at that bell curve distribution of being your best self, it's realizing there's a reason why there's only a few relative to how many there is in the world, but a few billionaires compared to how many millionaires there are. Mm-hmm. And why there's only a few millionaires compared to how many tens of thousands of heirs there are, right?
Right.
And the only way you're going to be able to sustain that unique 1% version of yourself, that billionaire version of yourself, is to do hard shit like billionaires would do. Consistently as the key. Because most people think, people when they come in here, they'll get some boxing in, they'll end up seeing themselves change on camera and they're confident. Can you do that consistently?
Yeah.
That'll be like, oh, I got this, and then I got that, and then they fall off, and then they don't track their diet, and then XYZ.
It's like, what are you doing outside of here? That matters.
And I say all this, Mo, because I don't know what you're doing outside of here. This is the first time we've talked in a minute, which is dope. Like
for
this,
a while, literally.
This being the first convo we've had in years, literally, like verbally.
And I knew it would be like this because we always had this.
Always. Yeah. Since I was like 12, you were like 14, right? Yeah. Talking about the antifadas and stuff when we were like 14, 15.
Yeah, you were kind of a troll back then.
Let's not get into the pictures and the caricatures, right? I may pop one up right here.
I love those. I still love them to this day.
But with Abu's picture, I legit looked at a picture of Abu and drew it.
I feel bad for those guys. Yeah, I will never feel bad for myself because of that.
Yeah, you don't want to give yourself ultimate victim card when you experience Michael doing
my God,
Ahmed and Abu. Right.
I was a target.
Oh, trust me, I'm already knowing. Yeah. Dude, my dad called you upside down head. That shit was so
I know. Incredible. I didn't know what to say. I was like,
all right, so yeah, my bad. I could go on a whole nother tangent. At this point, I don't know what you're doing outside here, straight up. But going forward, because there is going to be a more explicit effort on your end to make sure that there is more of this consistently, that will show me how serious you would be with even the training.
Sure.
And then when we start training, it'll give me a better idea of what you are actually doing outside of here, because it'll be evident when we start training.
Absolutely. You're right.
Do you have any aspirations of starting anytime soon? Like, what does your diet and stuff look like right now?
Diet's pretty, it's getting much better last month, actually.
Do you track your macronutrients or no?
No, I remember you gave me like a whole freaking
homework assignment
thing on that. Yeah. And you actually gave me the blueprint to what you were like actually selling to people, and I had it for free. So,
and maybe that's why people don't take stuff as serious as they should, though, is because it's given to them.
Well, That's a yes, and this is like a common thing. That's true. But for me personally, it's like I have all the intelligence in the world to be able to implement all the awareness in the world to be able to implement anything.
But what doesn't cause the implementation?
It's what happens with me personally is my uh struggle between my desire or yes, immediate desires and maybe lack of discipline in certain areas.
And listen, I'm gonna cut it right there. It's the latter. That's all it is.
Lack of
It's
discipline.
discipline.
Yeah.
It's discipline.
It is, right?
It's how often, dude, tracking your food, tracking your macronutrients, that whole list of stuff I sent you to do
Right.
is free discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And if you instill that discipline, the answers and the desires and all that stuff will reveal itself.
And you know, that's funny. That all starts with like habit forming things, and right. And then where does that come from? It comes from. I know this is getting deep at the end, but it comes from having a good role model when you're growing, especially as men.
And in the 21st century,
having a good father.
A lot of men don't only have men may have fathers, but they don't have good role models as fathers, good patriarchs who actually set the tone for how they should be men growing up.
I truly wholeheartedly believe our generation, because of me and you and people like us that have good intentions, I truly wholeheartedly believe that our generation will change the world, and if we already are in a way. I'm just very fearful of the younger ones already because of the way that they were raised by Gen X, and the way that they don't understand the value of serving the whole instead of serving the self. There's a very selfish aspect of the newer generations that they are not even aware of.
Dude, they grew up with the internet though. They grew up before they hit puberty. They were on the internet having to be judged, everything else. So like that's a whole nother conversation.
A whole nother thing, yeah.
But what it boils down to is you can't affect or control the younger generation. You can't affect or control anybody other than yourself. Exactly. So what it starts with is changing and facilitating that change for yourself, and then setting the example as a beacon of savagery, essentially, for anybody who wants to actually know how to get the stuff done. And so for you, though, it's going forward, identifying the disciplines Mo Sabla needs to instill in his life. No, you've got people like me in your corner to actually help you, but your effort will be, or your interest will be reflected in your effort. Mm-hmm. And unless I'm constantly getting actual inquiries from you and I'm actually seeing you reflect that effort to me, I'm going to assume the effort's directed elsewhere. But because of my predisposition, your actual actions will determine whether or not the interest is actually there.
That's rightfully so.
And that's why when I see people and they've gotten to 280 pounds or they've gotten to 250 pounds or they've gotten to a certain body type that they know they're well beyond being at, especially if they were at a body type pre-hand, it's humbling knowing that the only way they actually are going to get back to that level of optimization is looking themselves in the mirror and knowing they got them there. Mm-hmm. And only they can get themselves out.
Yes, victimhood is a hell of a drug.
But why do you think we talked about the victimhood of being Palestinian, the victimhood of being mixed, the victimhood of being black,
the victimhood?
That's
where it starts.
But it shouldn't end there, because it should end with you knowing that it's beyond the victimization of your experiences, and that you as a unique human being, especially in the 21st century, can overcome any level of trial or tribulation that the world throws at you nowadays.
Yes, this needs to be like pounded in the head of every human being. Yeah, it's just...
Well, it can start with us commenting on the videos, subscribing, sharing, and everything else, showing subtle support. You know what I'm saying, brother?
Yes, exactly. I actually have... I think I did subscribe to you and liked your videos.
Nice. But going forward, it's about consistently showing that effort, right?
Yeah, of course.
Heck yeah, brother.
Absolutely, man.
This is awesome, Mo. Any last words, thoughts, questions, brother?
Just last words. If anyone is watching this, sending you so much love and so much care, and just know that you have to fall in love with the journey, the very simple things of life. And if you can't do that, then you are damned.
Yep, and there's nothing worse than being aimless in this world.
Yeah, exactly. Aimlessness is
the road to damnation.
Yes, and then but always remember too, I think it's important that if you are aimless, then you being in that aimless journey is a important part of you being eventually who you want to be or happy.
You eventually hitting that target and aiming accurately first stems from you having no target to aim at.
Right, failure, right?
And through that failure, the targets to aim at will eventually reveal themselves, but you need the discipline first and to trust the process through the consistency of that discipline to eventually reveal those desires, those targets to aim at.
And have a good attitude about it.
Of course. I think it's easy to get caught in the pessimistic, nihilistic perspective of the 21st century, but if you can at least be aware of how susceptible you are to negative emotion and negative feelings,
right,
you can nearly force yourself through the effort and interest of wanting to be happy to be happier, or at least allow the happiness to find your life a little easier.
Yeah, and it's important to say that you're supposed to be sad and depressed and angry and happy and all of these things. You're supposed to be those things.
Especially if you haven't found worth.
You know what I mean? So, but even when you find worth, like you're supposed to have experiences
of course.
Where, and people, I think there's too much shit out there now. It's like positivity, positive affirmations and all this stuff. But no, you have to know that it's a part of your natural process and give yourself the grace when you're sad. Like, I was a very depressed person growing up, truthfully.
I hear that.
Depressing and shit. And honestly,
maybe that's why we related so well.
Yeah, and I fell in love with that side of myself, and that's completely normal, but it gets dangerous when you fall in love with it so much that it becomes who you are completely.
Right. When you drown yourself in the river like Narcissus did. Right.
Interesting.
The reflection of Narcissus, that's where the term narcissism comes from.
Oh, wow.
He looked at himself in the mirror or in the pond and he was like, God, you're so fucking sexy. And he literally drowned himself.
That's cool. Okay, that's incredible. We can definitely end it there.
We can end it there. Brother, it was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's definitely do this again. And going forward, we will just we'll continue this grind of growth through our interests, through our interests being reflected in our efforts.
Amen.
Thanks for watching that clip. This episode is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Support for self-sustained training is brought to you by the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped just launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the 4.0. Join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free shipping worldwide with code SST at Manscaped.com.
Yeah, shout out to Manscaped, man. They were nice enough to send us this Performance Package 4.0, which is their luxury grooming kit. And it comes with the Lawnmower 4.0 electric trimmer, the Weed Whacker for your ear and your nose hairs, and then all your post-shave performance essentials in the deodorant and the toner. Plus, they give you an anti-chafing boxer, which is super comfortable.
Super comfortable.
And then they top off the Performance Package with a nice little travel bag so you can carry all of your grooming tools with you. And you can get 20% off and free shipping with code SST at manscaped.com.
That's 20% off using code SST at manscaped.com. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools with the job using Manscaped.